Their victims' urine was baked into cakes and fed to dogs. One way to identify a witch was to bake a cake with rye and the urine of a witch's victim, and then feed the cake to a dog. There are differing accounts on how witch cake was used to identify witches. They were dunked into freezing water. A ducking stool was a medieval torture device that was primarily used to punish and humiliate women. The contraption resembled a seesaw with a chair affixed to one end. The device was placed along the edge of a river, and the offender, who would be strapped into the chair, was repeatedly plunged into the cold river water. They were bound and thrown into a body of water. Probably the ultimate example of a no-win situation, some accused witches had their hands and feet bound, and then they were thrown into a body of water. They were pressed with heavy stones. This method was used to manipulate accused witches into admitting their guilt. The witches in question had a board laid on top of them, and their accusers placed heavy rocks on the board until they either confessed or they were literally crushed. They were scratched by their victims until they bled. Some of the accused were tested by being scratched by their supposed victims. It was believed that those cursed by a witch would experience relief if they scratched the person responsible for their affliction. They were told to pray, and it had to be perfect. Accused witches were asked to recite the Lord's Prayer, and to recite it perfectly. This meant perfect pronunciation. No stuttering, no twitching, no shaking. They were asked to touch their victims. Some victims were afflicted with violent fits that caused them to shake and convulse. To prove their innocence, some witches were asked to touch their victims. Their bodies were examined for a third nipple. Suspected witches were searched for a third nipple. It was believed that this third nipple was used to feed one of the witch's helpers or familiars. Their bodies were examined for markings. In addition to being searched for a third nipple, suspected witches were also examined for unusual markings. During witch hunts, moles, scars, and birthmarks were often believed to be the mark of the devil. They were pricked with pins and needles. It was believed that witches bore a special mark that identified them as a practitioner of witchcraft. Witch hunters would identify these marks and use a pin or needle to prick at them. If the suspected witch felt no pain, he or she was declared a witch. They were forced to summon the devil, known as charging or incantations. Some of those on trial for witchcraft were forced to verbally summon the devil, supplicating him to stop possessing an individual who might be in the middle of a fit or seizure of some sort. They were weighed against a stack of Bibles. This test required that a suspected witch would be weighed against a stack of Bibles. They were observed to see if they muttered to themselves. This one is cruel and bizarre to the extent that it turns what was likely a form of mental illness into a telltale sign of a witch. If you could observe a potential witch talking to herself, muttering under her breath in some fashion, odds are she was probably a witch doing incantations or something else evil. If they looked old and witch-like, that was enough to condemn them. For some unfortunate women, the only test they needed to pass for the public to declare them a witch was to be a bit older. Spectral evidence was enough to lock a witch up. Spectral evidence refers to testimony provided by a witness that states that the accused person's spectral shape appeared to the witness in a dream. This was an accepted form of accusation during the Salem witch trials.